Hello, LitCon. Um, Happy late evening or good morning or even late evening, depending on where you're sitting. That's what we've been talking about, getting ready for the panel. So I am your hostess, Phoebe Darkling. I write sci-fi as well as fantasy and horror, and I'm dabbling in screenwriting these days. So, you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and just say a little bit about the book and the world that you want to talk about today. Laurie, would you like to go first?
Yes, so I'm Laurie Bell. I'm from Australia, so I'm talking to everyone from the future at the moment, which is a fun way to bring into the sci-fi nature of the world building here. I write science fiction and fantasy. I blog and review on my website as well. And my sci-fi world, which is Whitefire, and I have a book of an anthology book of short stories, which is also set in the same universe.
Very cool.
Yeah. Alex?
I'm Alex G Zarate. I'm an author, artist, and photographer. The book I'll be talking about is Drake's Orb. It's a sci-fi novel that'll be out later this year. And I'm having a lot of fun putting it together. It's actually something I started a while back, and I wanted to rewrite it because I had so much more to put into it. And it's now going to become the first book in a trilogy.
Wow.
Your world is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
It grew so
That's
much more.
fantastic.
It's like I can't retell this as one book. It's got to go further. So
Yeah,
it's going to be a trilogy.
very fun.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Well, so my first question for you guys about your world of your stories is primarily where does your story take place? Or do people travel a lot? So, how sort of spatially big is the world of your story?
Well,
Alex, you want to go
oh,
first?
yep. Sorry, Alex.
Uh, sure, no problem. My story begins with a captain that has this traumatic event takes place in his life, and he's part of a military group, and he decides he's going to leave that and go work under civilian exploration vessels. So he gets into a deep space vessel that's going to go out doing exploration, and it shows kind of the expansion. They're constantly going beyond the borders of what they know, and they're just kind of going by what probes have given them as information, so they can do some testing and just stuff for the ship that he's in. But as he goes, I have the story as he begins to see different indications that something's not right, and he has to work with the ship's AI and the crew that is not happy he's there.
Mm,
A civilian crew now has a
Mm.
military career captain come in, and they're very upset about it. One in particular has a very strong dislike for anything military government like. So he's facing that on top of it. So every mistake that happens, every issue that takes place, he has to face constant scrutiny, and it's kind of like, okay, it's all because you're here rather than something's wrong, and we can't understand what. And as the story progresses, you find out there's a they're never expected to return from these missions.
mm.
Oh,
So
wow.
and he has to uncover it. So it's a fun story, but it actually continues to expand. It goes like we've gone beyond the solar system. We're checking out other galaxies even,
Wow.
and
That
we
was going to be
found
my
ways
next
of
question. Yeah, was how far afield have they gotten?
uh, very far. I have it so that they found I call them archways, but you know for the most part it's like a Stargate.
Mm,
They've created technologies they can leave from one location and appear somewhere else. However, they're the ones who are creating these, so the further out you can go, the more you can put out there for other people to follow.
mhm.
And he's one of the ships that's going out there to explore where they can put these.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
That sounds very cool. Yeah, I went way, way out. My Whitefire is set in another galaxy, another universe. We have three giant sectors of space that all interlock with a border, and those borders are being encroached by Sector 3, who are creating skirmishes. But my main world is set in Sector 1. My main character is a space agent who flies around Sector 1 solving problems and tracking down gun smugglers and tracking down drug smugglers and all sorts of things. So it's a fun action adventure, but it's very much, it's not Earth. It's also set in the future. So far in the future that Earth had evacuees from the planet when it was destroyed, and they arrived in Sector 1 300 years prior to the events of what's happening in Whitefire. So they basically came into Sector 1 as refugees.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read something one time about the scope of the world and the scope of the problems based on geographic constraints. Because like Stranger Things, right? It's kids on their bikes. That is
Yes.
the bounding factor of how far they can go. So it is a town level disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can fly around in space, right? Like you have you can have planetary sort of scale
Yep.
disasters. That's, like in Star Wars, it was inevitable that they were going to come up with something that could kill multiple planets at the same
Yeah,
time because they had one that could do one planet at one time.
that's it.
The scale of my stuff is a lot smaller. Riftmaker is my most sort of science fiction novel because it makes a nod at string theory.
Yep.
Uh, but it's a portal fantasy
Oh, I love those.
kind of a thing. And so yeah, it's one city and the forest just beyond the city. It's all constrained to this very small place. So I admire people who can do these big, sweeping, grand, odysseys across space. Maybe I'll dip my toe in that at some point because I love watching and reading that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So, all right. Another thing I love to ask sci-fi people, what kind of a role does language play in the world that you've built? Like, do you have special slang? Does everybody speak the same language? Yeah, Laurie, what's your world like in
I
terms
do have a lot of slang, a lot of swearing that does occur because humans have basically integrated through into all of Sector 1 and spread out as they are wont to do. The language is mostly based in a version of English. But yes, I do have several different words that pop up that have been grabbed from different planets and different locations. So depending on the home planet of a particular person, they may use particular slang words from that area, and they've been shared and all sorts of things. So it is a lot of fun having the occasional word that you can use to swear a lot without it being a book that's very full of profanity.
Can you give us an example?
So I have keg, which is, well, I won't go into fully what it is to be taking over, but it may involve couples being together. And there's shengi, which is a version of, I guess, crap or yeah, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to play with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, my made up swear word in Riftmaker is pox. We'll
Nice.
yell pox instead of the F word.
Oh, very good.
Right? Because it fulfills that same kind of the
Yes,
sound. It's very
exactly.
satisfying to yell.
And I have Zendia, which is a god name that is used quite often in the place of God. It may be, Zendia, yeah, is the female god, which is fun to play with too.
What about you, Alex? Got cool words?
Actually, I did everything I could to avoid using any kind of word. I kind of for a couple of scenes where characters get upset or something happens, I just mentioned that they begin swearing, and then the other person stops them in the middle and tries to stop it from happening. And it's like I explain that it's swearing, but I don't tell them what they're saying, what was being said.
Mm-hmm.
That way I can keep it clean, but at the same time, it's like that something is going on or something major is taking place.
Yeah.
That way I don't have to worry about put in like a Frelling or whatever different things we've got from other sci-fi.
Oh, there's
And
so many. I've had to cull all of mine just because they've been used everywhere else.
yeah. I saw so many over the years, everything from Firefly and Farscape and so many constant, great uses of different alternate words. I was thinking,
Yes.
I would love to do that, but I think I'm going to stick to just, keeping it regular, keeping it. I just thought of, Star Trek. Everything was always straightforward. You knew what the characters are saying. You knew who was where, and kind of steer clear of, having them suddenly come up to somebody who they cannot talk to. The one in the first book, the one creature they encounter, they're basically fighting for survival, and there's no thought of why is this doing what it's doing, what's going on. It's more of, oh no, we're in danger, we got to get out of here, we have to fight our way to get to safety. But in the later chapters, I kind of reveal, well, this creature was doing something for its survival, and they could have tried communicating, but at the time it was more, it's a life and death situation. Do we want to continue this path and maybe die trying to get near this thing, or do we have to leave and just get to safety? And they end up going their separate ways, so they don't get to speak to this being, but they go their own way. And we as the reader get to find out what the story is behind this and why it's where it is.
Yep. Cool.
So Laurie, you mentioned that you've got a goddess.
Yes.
So yeah, my next question is going to be about faith. If there's a faith system in your world, and also if you borrowed from any existing myth tradition or anything to build the faith in your.
With Whitefire, although they refer to Zendir a lot, only certain cultures from certain planets actually do believe in Zendir, and the others would be very, I guess, in a way, very Australian. There's a lot of, do we use the word for no particular reason? Quite probably yes. And so that there's faith in areas, and it depends on which planet Tony will fly into, and that understanding of how that culture works to do her job. Yeah, so it's quite interesting, but Tony herself doesn't have a particular faith that she follows. Yeah.
What about you, Alex? Have you built a religion?
I try to keep it as grounded in our type of world as I can. Just with the idea that in the years to come, things that we consider natural today are going to be looked at as like such a weird way of talking, such a weird way of looking at things. Just like if we go back 20 years to what people were talking about then. So I try to keep it as to the kind of content that's being talked about, the people and the beliefs and spirituality and things like that. But again, it's a science vessel, and it's a captain, so they're very set in their ways. It doesn't go too much into the spiritual realm. Although I do have an artist, and I do have a doctor that does get chatty and is a historian. So he has a tendency to go off into all these explanations that nobody wants to hear.
A nice way to put that exposition in.
Exactly. I love doing that. It's like you can have this info dump, and just like the reader, the characters in there are also rolling their eyes. It's like, okay, can we get on with this? What we actually came here for, and you can stop explaining to me about this ancient way of traveling from one place to another, and explain to me what we're doing now.
Yes, I have a spaceship very similar. The spaceship AI is a giant gossip, so he will hack into any database anywhere, any planet he arrives on. He'll hack into the database and he'll pull in all the local news and all the local stories, and yes, all the gossip tends to come through Zach. So
I love that. That's such a great device. Both of them actually are really good for conveying your world to the reader. That's really clever.
So yeah, no, it's a lot of fun, and Zach has a tendency, a bit like Red Dwarf with Holly, to change his vocal tones, change his voice. So I get to have a good play with Zach, just causing all sorts of mischief, hacking into systems, blowing things up quite often. So I like Zach. He's a good little AI.
That's awesome. So another one of my favorite questions to ask is what do people in your worlds do for fun? What kind of leisure activities do you have? You both have spaceships involved.
Yes. A lot of drinking in Whitefire. There is a lot of drinking and a lot of dancing, and perhaps the occasional reference to other activities going on. There's a lot of gambling going on as well. I have several bar scenes where Tony and other characters meet up or come across each other in a bar. Very Star Warsy in that sense, where things happen in a bar as they do. And yes, so that's a lot of fun and Tony, because she's an agent, she's quite often overworked, and that's her way of dealing with the stress and de-stressing with one of her friends to go out to a bar and get hammered.
That works. That's leisure.
Yeah.
But
For my sci-fi story, they have a virtual world that they go into, and that's pretty much while they're doing the sleep cycle, where they're traveling long distances to conserve power. They go into this virtual reality where, a lot of them are like, okay, one person in particular, one of the female characters has had her legs lost in an attack that she had. So in real life, she has these robotic legs that she can walk around in and look normal, but she's in constant pain from them. So when the time comes and okay, they're going into sleep mode, she goes into a virtual world, and all she likes to do is, go out into, go hiking trails and running through tracks and stuff, because she used to enjoy doing those things. So I always have it. She is emphasized on that. When the captain goes in, he kind of recreates kind of like a version of his home that he left. So he tries to, sit out in the backyard and enjoy a good book. And he gets to do that. Other ones, like I said, there's an artist. He actually creates canvases, out of thin air, and actually turns his fingers into the tools he wants. So he has brushes and tools of mine. So and I have one that's kind of a fitness nut. So he does as many intense, extreme sports as he can while he's in there. So it's like everyone has these different things that they do while they're off work. And I also included a time dilation when they're in there, so they have much longer time periods.
Oh, I love that idea. That's fantastic.
So yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that. That way, I give them more time to do things and more ways to explore each character.
Yeah, I was laughing, Laurie, when you brought up dancing, because I was thinking about this for myself. And in Riffmaker, you see two different parties, and one is the really rich people, and one is the really poor people. And the poor people party is way more fun.
Yeah. Always tends to be, doesn't it? No one watching
it's a very
and
much
judging.
above and below decks,
casting
Titanic
judgment
kind of a situation. Okay, so we moving right along, I want to start talking a little bit about your process for building your worlds. And so a question that comes up quite often now that I am in screenwriting is they want you to be able to answer why you? Why are you the person to write this story? And sometimes I'm just like, because it's in my head. But it is true that we have these experiences and things that have come up in our lives that do inspire us. So yeah, I'm curious if you have anything, from your real life, from your job, that feeds into your world building.
Well, it's interesting. I started Whitefire. I actually wrote Whitefire when I was 17. So it was very much my younger self who wrote and came up with the story and the plot line and the characters. And it was primarily because there just wasn't enough back then that I could find female characters that were actually nitty gritty in the action. They were, I mean, certainly quite a lot of sci-fi books and fantasy books, but for myself, I just couldn't find those. I wanted Princess Leia to be doing the Han Solo character. It was very much I wanted her in causing all the trouble and getting into trouble and getting herself out of trouble, which I just didn't find much of. I read a lot of Nancy Drews and a lot of the Hardy Boys, so a lot of detective stories with with really awesome female characters. But I'm a massive fan fiction. I read so many Star Wars books. I've got all the Star Trek books. I've got all the Stargate books. I love that sort of thing. And you did not have that early. Captain Janeway didn't even come along until I was a bit older. So yeah, definitely I was writing it because I wanted to read it and I just couldn't find it.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. I have a series beyond, Riftmaker is the one I was talking about, but I have a Gaslamp fantasy series. And so my main character is this 30-something woman with no interest in having children because that's who I am.
Yeah.
And, and she's this anti-hero. And I like to say she's Han Solo in a bustle
Nice.
because she would have shot first.
Yeah.
And it's true. I didn't find these female anti-heroes hardly at all. And so I really wanted to it's a good plug for the, write what you want to read because
Yes.
it needs to be out there for, someone else it's going to resonate with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alex?
Definitely. For me, when I came up with the idea, actually, I started with the idea of just I want to write something that I've never touched on before, and the first thing that I came up with was a broken captain. Instead of having Captain Kirk, this flamboyant, confident captain who takes a seat and immediately is taking charge, I wanted a captain who'd suffered some big trauma. And then he's starting because he's trying to get away from that type of life and that type of experience, only to find out that something is happening that he has to suddenly go into this tactical mindset. And all I did was draw on. I did go in the service for 8 years. I'm working in a large company and a lot of technology. So when I started, I was like, okay, I can see where a lot of these things can go. I can see where all the people come from. And there's so many different perspectives to look at, and I wanted to make sure this captain can go through these things, and I can address all the individuals that are involved to set up the scenario. And like you were saying about the strong female character, although I wanted the captain to be this outsider, I wanted to make sure he had a female first officer instead of the Kirk and Spock buddy thing. I wanted this female character that's going to challenge him and does not really care for his way of doing things. So she's going to actually be the one to challenge him at every turn. And she could definitely take command of the ship at any time just because she is that type of a character. And as a civilian ship, everyone's outlook for the captain is, you're basically driving the bus. You don't run anything. So as he's learning about these things, like, okay, everyone is like, they're in command of their own labs, their own sections. Engineering team is their own little hierarchy. So they look at him as, okay, you're just driving us to where we're going. And as he's learning about these things, they blame him for things that go wrong, but he's also piecing together the things that lead to these terrible events. And it's only because he's able to do this that he realizes, this mission that he's been sent on, they've all been sent on this in a one-way trip. And he has to piece it all together to save the ship and overcome, these outlooks that he's getting from the crew. And thankfully, with the time dilation, they have a lot more time to sort these things out and to get to know one another and to see why they're where they are.
That's great.
So yeah, it's all the experiences, everything I brought in there, and things I've learned and known over the years.
That's a lot of great conflict. I was just going to say that's a great way of building that conflict and tension into all the characters interacting too.
Yeah,
I was just going to mention, you said that you're an artist as well, and you've got an artist character. So are you a painter?
I did painting for a while, but I was more up into sculpture and played around with computer graphics, design sort of thing. And I do my own covers. So that plus illustrations. Have a lot of fun with it. I've got a close friend who did a lot of painting. So I always kind of admire that way of doing things. Handling that kind of medium is always very impressive to me. For me, I know whenever I do a digital thing, it's always with Photoshop, and I can do everything. You can, any mistake you do, you can correct almost immediately. Or make layers so that you can roll it back in case you change your mind about something. To do something permanent is a very difficult task and skill that only the great artists are able to do without even thinking. And there are many out there, and I definitely wanted to put that on there so that this character who is doing things basically digitally, but it's in a virtual world where he can create the tools he needs, and some of them are tools that today's artists would struggle to get hold of unless you've already made it and you're already famous and able to be independent in your creations. So I had a lot of fun with that, wanted to continue. And of course, I do describe a lot of the artwork that he creates as the captain's getting to know all his crew.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I really, really loved my sculpture classes that I took in college. I was an art history minor, and so we had to do studio art as part of the minor. And I think my favorite was the sculpture class. I had to go to a different college to take it. Mine didn't offer it. And so it was a summer. And so it was every day, 4 days a week or something. And yeah, sculpture is amazing because it's so, what I liked about it was how it could be so spontaneous and so strong. Because I was working with metal a lot. And so you just like
Wow.
do a thing and then you step back and you're like, and you weigh 20 pounds and I just made you. And all it took was some fire. I don't know. I really, really enjoyed
That's cool.
doing
Oh, yeah.
sculpture.
I always loved the people who could work with heavy materials like that, whether they're welding and so many glass. People work with glass, and
Wow.
that is an incredible way of doing things. Every time I played with it a little bit, I was like, okay, I can't handle it. It shatters so easily.
Yeah, it's so dangerous.
Wrong temperature, and you leave it too long in one way or the other, and there's just no way to save it. I had more fun with ceramics, pottery, and sculpture clay, because you can't, as long as you maintain the moisture, you can add and subtract to it as you go. So I had fun with the sculpture clay. I liked doing plaster creations. Some of the last ones I did were very huge, and I miss going to those labs and these studios, because after years after all that was behind me, I kind of miss it. Wow, I had so much room to expand all these creations I did, and today is like, okay, I just got this little space to work with, so it's on the computer, and I'm down to just graphic arts. So
Yeah.
That's the best part about writing. You can delete anything and copy and paste and bring it back in and undo.
Okay, so that was a fun little artistic digression. But let's talk a little bit more about your process for building your world. So both of you have space, obviously, factoring space and spaceships. So what kind of resources were helpful for you when you were doing your research to build your world?
I watched a lot of Doctor Who. A lot of Doctor Who, a lot of Star Wars, a lot of Star Trek. I was very much of a TV generation. All the books that I was reading were based on a lot of the shows that I was watching anyways. So I had a lot of that for research. Love a good space documentary. There's some great documentaries that are up on the streaming services that I love watching and listening to the new things that they learn about planets, and depending on what studies are happening at any one time. I have a friend who's now an astrophysicist, which is just amazing to me. I did not have that kind of concentration span with school at all, but can have some just amazing conversations, and I've got some good science books as well that I love to grab hold of. As I said, I wrote Whitefire when I was 17, so a lot of the work has been updating a lot of the references and the AIs and the computer systems and the robots to be that little bit more technically advanced than they were, I think, when I wrote my story. So that's where I get a lot of my research from, and science non-fiction books are fun to read.
They
That
are fun
makes
to
me,
read.
yeah, they are great.
Yeah, I used to work in a library in a museum, in a science museum. And so it was a lending library for the members and so and staff. I read a lot of really, really interesting nonfiction
Yeah,
books. I
yeah,
especially like Mary Roach. She is so entertaining, and she has one called
yes,
Packing for Mars.
yes,
Yeah, and she
yeah.
just does a deep dive into a single topic. I
And
think,
then watching Perseverance at the moment wheeling around on Mars.
yeah, exactly. What about you, Alex? What kind of resources did you find helpful?
Very similar. All the science fiction shows, movies, the different books that have been out. I pretty much tried to uh, accomplish what I needed to do for the story, but I also enjoy the fact of the more advanced we become, the more we're kind of not aware of the technology behind it. So
Mm,
even though my captain is aware, oh yeah, we're creating these archways to travel from place to place, we're still in a ship. He's still a captain of a ship, but he doesn't have the technical knowledge to actually identify how this archway technology works, and basically the Stargate type of thing. He understands the basics of it, but at one point I have him trying to explain to someone, oh yeah, I know how this works and that goes, and they kind of look at him like, no, that's not the way that.
That's
So
great.
it's like I don't really give them the actual reason behind it, but I do say, yeah, this technology is available, it's there, uh, but it's to the point where it's so advanced. It's like people picking up a smartphone. It's like you understand it works, but you
Yeah,
don't realize the touch technology and the wireless signals and how we came to that and how it's working. You just know it works.
yeah,
So,
yeah. No, that's really good.
yeah.
It's an advantage of having your captain be such an outsider is you don't have to explain everything to the reader because it's his point of view.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a good
I had a
workaround.
lot of fun with a work in progress that I'm still working on at the moment that involves the breakdown of advanced technology and the
Mm,
fact that they just don't know how to fix it and how to repair it. So there's a lot of mishmash, jumble of new technology and old technology, a lot of hacking and jury rigging to get things to keep working,
mhm,
and really showing that breakdown of there'd been a war, and the first group that they attacked were the technologists, the ones
mm,
who understood how to create all of this technology. So once they took them out, it really left too many without the knowledge to keep things working. So
mhm.
that was a really fun thing to explore.
I had fun with Riftmaker because so I've got my two worlds. There's us in the now, and there's them in the now. Their now looks like the 19th century because that was when contact was cut off with our world.
Oh,
They were just
cool.
stealing all of our technology. They weren't developing anything for themselves. But they got cut off because something happened, and so it became illegal to actually travel between. And so like I'm actually converting it to a screenplay right now. And so the first thing that you see is you think that maybe you're in London in Victorian times, and then all of a sudden, someone pulls out an electric violin that's been smuggled,
Wow.
and they don't have
Oh,
electricity, so they had to figure out a way to like make the amplifier for this electric violin.
how
And so
cool.
yeah, cobbling together and not quite
Yeah, that's
understanding
really
how stuff
cool.
works. Yeah, electricity. Whoa. All right. Let's see. We've all, one of the questions was going to be what are your tips for cluing in readers to to figure out your world, and you both already given some really good ones. But do you have anything else on that subject, like your strategies for revealing the world to your readers?
Well, I have my story is very close point of view for the main character. So everything is from Tony's point of view. So showing what is normal for her and what is unusual and when things don't work and why they don't work, or that's a person that you wouldn't see regularly. So they're more surprising to see. I think that's how I really show a lot of what works and how it works, and why it works. If she just assumes that it will work, then that's pretty regular. But anything that's a little bit different or broken that needs to be fixed, that's when I go into more detail with that, with her companions. So she has a robot dog that travels with her as an agent. He's very by the book, very doing the right thing. And then you've got Zach, who's chatting away. Tony wears electronic glasses, so she gets messages popping up on her screen all the time from Zach back in the ship, gossiping and carrying on. So that allows for a lot of explanation to come through quite easily through dialogue. Yeah.
For my story, I pretty much have, like, kind of like I was mentioning about the cell phone technology. I have, the captain, when he's going through the motions, he's gesturing in the air and opening up a screen, and then he's talking to the AI and saying, okay, I need this or that, or contact this, or upload this information. And I have different things appearing, different images. So he has some things in an ocular implant and other things that are in holograms in front of him. So I introduce all these things, and like when they're in the virtual world, he pretty much just absently is thinking, okay, I have to do this in the virtual world when I move into the ship, and all his belongings are being transported to him. But in the meanwhile, he has these holographic images of it. So he's sitting in his big empty room in his quarters, and he's actually just holding his hands in the air and just adjusting them and pointing to where he wants them. And so by the time he's done, it's like he's thinking, oh, my arms are so tired. Moving is such a tiring thing. And then he gets ready to leave, and he just activates these robots, these drones, and all his belongings are rising up out of the ground, and they start putting everything away and hanging pictures and adjusting things and he's kind of like thinking, oh, I'm tired from all this unpacking. And it's like, it's just for him, it's just a regular process that he's not even thinking twice of it. But for the reader, you actually get to see, okay, there's holographic displays, everything is scanned, everything is saved, you can control things digitally, and then you have robots to do all the heavy work for you, and the AI is there interacting with him the whole time. So I keep things going to the point where, for him it's commonplace, but for the reader, they get to see all these really cool things, which I loved. And like when he's in a virtual world, it's like, okay, it's kind of like, okay, you're getting ready for the day, getting dressed for something, and you can actually just select what you have on, and the clothes appear. And then when at one point he gets very tired and winded in there, and he's like, this virtual world's doing this to me and I don't like it. So he says, I'm gonna go take a shower. And when he goes to take a shower, the water is like digital, crystalline images coming down on him. And he says it's kind of refreshing his image so he can feel better. But he kind of identifies that, and it's just like, okay, you can see these things, you can understand them, but it's not really something that the reader would have understood if it wasn't explained ahead of time. But that way I can set up as, oh yeah, there's technology everywhere, but it's common. So when something new comes along and something that they can't explain, you realize, okay, this is a big deal, because they're at this level where it's almost you're gesturing to the air and making something appear. All of a sudden, oh, something new is happening, something dangerous. You realize, okay, if it's dangerous to these people, it's something they really have to worry about. So it amps up the tension as the story progresses.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful strategy that both of you are talking about. That, what is normal to the character and what isn't normal is it's an excellent way to do that world building without having to like dump a whole bunch of information. You can just set up these scenarios where, oh, they're surprised by something.
Although I find I keep writing myself into corners with the fact that she has an AI and a robot who know so much and can get into areas, and it just makes things easy. So unfortunately for both Zach and Mate, the quickest way to put them out of picture is with technology breaking and with an EMP or something that will bring them down, forcing her to have to manage without that ease of devices, which I think we probably all deal with now with our phones and our iPads and computers and everything. It's when the power goes out that you really think, oh, wait a minute, what do I do now?
So yeah, so another good process thing that I like to find out how people work with keeping track of all the details of your world. Do you keep notebooks? Do you keep it in your head and go insane? Like how do you keep your world straight for yourself?
I have a lot of notebooks. I write my first draft manually, so everything's handwritten. So I do have a lot of notebooks I can go back to and compare various comments and notes that I've made to myself. But with my anthology of short stories, my original Whitefire was designed as multi-point of view. And as the reiterations went through and the drafts went through, it became a single point of view. So all of that material and characterization and extra things that are going on in the world, whether it's political, I have political characters, I have military characters, and all of that sort of disappeared with removing these points of view. So I ended up keeping a lot of those and I've added to them over time, knowing what their stories are. And so my anthology of The Good, the Bad, and the Undecided is actually more material for Whitefire because I have so much. And so much is going on in this universe, and there's all different sectors, and you have political systems and wars going on here and all sorts of things. So that allowed me to keep even more of my world and world building in the one place, and that I get to keep all of those stories together, a bit like what Alex was saying earlier, one story becoming so huge you need more space to tell it in. And I think that's why I put the anthology together, because I had so many fun stories of other things that were going on at the same time that was just I did not want to lose, and they're fun, a great little read, but it builds on that world, so it just keeps growing.
Oh, yeah, for me, I have tons of notes. I've got countless emails. I can't even tell you how many, where I found a nice article or found a good website, and I email myself the link, or I copy it and or I print a PDF and then send it to myself, so I have the information on hand. I have a lot of information that I use, but I also have notes. No matter where I'm at, sometimes I pull out my phone and I'm jotting down a note and then email it to myself really quick so I can make sure I have it. So that's pretty much what happened when I started the story. And I gotta expand the story, and I realized, okay, there is so much more to tell. So much technology, so many things, and what is the story behind this story, and what led to this part. And before I knew it, I created this entire back history that led to this point. So when I finally got the story written, and I did the outline for the trilogy, I was like, okay, they're going to be their own self-contained novel, but they're going to be one leading to the next, to the final one, because once you understand it, the first part is like a self-contained story. It has its own beginning, middle, and end. The second part is going to be, it's going to take everything from that first one and it's going to turn it into a new challenge that they're going to be facing. And of course, the last one is going to be the culmination of everything, where I finally answer a lot of the questions and what's going on and why a lot of things have been happening the way they have. And it's just like you said, you have this entire history, this backstory you create, and more than you're ever going to put down. But as long as you have the story and you can work with it, you can give hints as to where it goes and what's going on, and at least what's happening and why. So you can put it into perspective, why this person is acting this way, why they're referring to this past event and what they're talking about. And you don't have to worry about, I have to come up with something to explain this, because you already know, you've already created this entire history of what took place before you walked into that scene and that chapter.
Yeah, recently, I was in, I think it was like the big fiction writing group in Facebook, and someone was complaining. They're like, why does everybody write trilogies and series? Doesn't anyone just write a standalone book anymore? And it's like, you have any idea how big our worlds are? What are you
Yeah.
complaining about? Why
Yeah,
wouldn't you want to hang out in these worlds for longer?
yeah. I try to make the books as standalone as possible.
Hmm.
But like I said, there was so much more to tell. I wanted to make sure I could continue, so I gave it its own ending. But like I said, I've outlined, 3 books so that you can actually say, okay, like you were saying, what happens after this part? You know, it's the story's over, but only this story.
Yes,
There's a
and then you go down
continuation to it.
the rabbit hole of, but hang on, what was that person doing? How did they get to that point? Wait a minute. So what? And it just suddenly you've got these branches going out like a giant tree, and there's just so
Hmm.
many stories that can come in and divert and go off in different directions as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, I when I first started writing Riftmaker, I expected it to be a trilogy, and I finished the first book, and like a new indie publishing house signed me, and then fell apart. And then I had moved on already and was writing my next books, and then I joined up with another small indie
Oh, good.
publishing house, published my book, fell apart a month later.
Oh, no.
And so, yeah, and so I had all these feelings, right, about this book. Even though I loved the characters and I loved the world, I just had all these sort of negative juju about the book. But because now I've decided to do screenwriting, I'm revisiting it and I'm having so much fun because I'm doing it as a television pilot.
Oh,
And so I
wow.
actually wrote like the 24 hours before chapter one as the
Ah,
pilot.
Nice.
Because, right, in a novel, you can do a lot of, in the narration, you can give a lot of background about people, but you only have sight and sound on the screen. And so I wanted to introduce the characters all in their own way, in a very different way than the novel was. And it was so much fun. I've been enjoying it a lot, getting to revisit this world. And I'm making those cogs in my head burning, thinking about maybe I will come back to it and write a sequel at
they
some
never
point.
really go away, do they? There's always something that just sits there waiting for your
Hmm.
attention.
Hmm. Well, and I did write another short story that was set in the same world. The tone is completely different.
Oh,
It's
wow.
this like it's this guy who's stuck in a 1 hour loop of time because his brain's been fractured because he
Oh,
is one of these people who travels between worlds. And yeah, and so
that's fascinating.
it's all like out of order and it's very memento-y. And so it's one of my favorite stories that I've ever written, but it is weird. It is a weird story because it also has barely touches on these elements of the riffs, but that is the basis for it, and I know that. So,
That's brilliant.
all right. So, either of you, as you were doing your world building and your research, did you run into any problems? Like, were there any facts that all of a sudden like stopped you in your tracks and you had to change directions as you were figuring things out?
That's a good question. Well, I really a lot of mine just comes through the time frame. So the fact that I wrote Whitefire so long ago, a lot of the technology that I was predicting to be very, very, very future is so commonplace now. And in fact, it was very retro, very retro with my robot dog. And I really had to rebuild all of that and bring it into a new direction and then introduce technology that is probably still already in play now. That's I think that's the biggest problem with science fiction is there's nothing that's too futuristic anymore. We can do holograms now. We can do
Hmm.
all sorts of screens that will build off 3D printing, and we've got all of that sort of thing that's already happening now. How do you come up with something that is beyond
Hmm.
that? Back in the day we'd watch Star Trek or Star Wars and think, how are they doing this? They're talking to the computer, they're talking to whereas now it's oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What I do when I wake up.
Do you have any facts that didn't cooperate with you?
For me, yes. I two of the things that took place in the story, which at first I didn't think about it, was like the female character whose legs are have to be robotic because in an attack she lost them, and I mentioned in the entire story that yeah, cloning is possible. So I was like, okay, cloning is possible. How could I not
Yeah.
have her
Yeah.
legs cloned and replaced because the technology is available? And I agonized over that because okay, she needs to have these robotic legs because they become a key element later on in the story.
Mhm.
And I kept thinking, I can't have her with this. I have to do something else. And I ended up adjusting the attack to being an alien type of creatures, and I had to actually design these creatures to have some element that uh, their venom is disruptive to technology. So
Mm.
where her legs were damaged and they had to be cut off, her legs kind of resist any kind of technology, which is why she's
Wow.
in constant pain, which is
Mm.
why they can't clone her legs. And that adds more to the story, and it also added to
Mm.
the point of okay, there are still limits to technology and to the advancements that they've done.
Mhm.
And a nice thing that gave me was there's a biological aspect to the restriction of technology. Something out there can actually
Mm.
disrupt, you know, machines and disrupt any kind of uh, electromagnetic sources. So I thought that would be really good, and I
Yeah.
do end up using those later on. But that took me so long to come up with, because I was like, okay, how can I've already explained we have this ability, we have what we can do, but I did not explain, how and why,
Yep.
and I had to recreate the whole reason behind her accident and what happened and her attack. Um,
Mhm.
Another thing
Yeah,
was
technology is great, but then it causes more problems.
exactly. Another one was the AI. I kept the AI like in Star Trek,
Yep.
the original Star Trek, where it was just a voice. And well, why isn't it a robotic avatar
Mm.
that's walking
Yep.
around? And I had to come up with a reason, is because they've restricted the advancement of AIs because of the fear of some robotic self-awareness that takes
Mhm.
place. So they pushed it as far as they can to make it as lifelike as possible, but they do not allow it to advance beyond a certain point for the fear that they're going to do something that's going to cause
Mm.
an artificial life form that's going to attack us.
Mhm.
And I had to come up with that reason, which
Yep.
ended up making an entire history that why did that happen, where did it come from.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was like, oh, I'm running into these little walls of I need to
Mm.
have a reason for this. I have to say why,
And
because
it's
we've
not just the way of finding the reason, it's you do have to build that entire backstory.
yeah.
Why, way back when did they not choose this? And yeah, oh, so complicated.
Oh yeah, that's why it's like, okay, it's great to have it as a standalone story, but you're literally creating a history and a world,
Mhm.
and a universe at some point, as to where this all came from and how it all came together. So if you're not, putting all this information, you are going to run into a wall and realize, well, wait, I just written myself in a corner. I can't explain why this is
Yep.
happening, because even the characters are asking, well, how did this happen and why? And why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? And it's just a natural thing when you're in conversation.
Mhm.
So it's like if you don't have these answers, your reader is going to have the answers, and they're not going to like that you didn't address it.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's well put.
Yeah, creativity is so amazing because I've always found that if I have constraints, I am much more creative
Yep.
than, right, like the horror evacuee, right? Just looking at a blank page with no guidance or anything at all. But like give you one parameter, like it has to do something that involves the color red. All of a sudden, right,
Yeah.
you've got ideas. And
Yeah.
so yeah, that's a wonderful thing about world building. Yeah, so many good examples, Alex, of running into an obstacle
Oh,
and then finding a wonderful solution to get around.
yep.
I also find too, people ask a lot in these forums, um, Like, who's killed your main character? Or how do you feel about killing off your main character? They're probably writing standalone books rather than series. But sometimes I'm just like, you know, when I read someone killing off their main character, often it's because I think that they're not creative enough to get them out of it. Like they didn't actually, like they made that an option, and so they didn't search for a more creative, more interesting way to get them out
Oh,
of it.
makes me so angry. I follow a story for the character, and they've
Mhm.
taken me through this journey and made me like this character despite whatever issues that they might have or what problems they have. And then they kill them off, and that makes me very cross. I want the journey to continue. I want it to keep going.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I always think of Sherlock Holmes and how Sir Arthur Conan Doyle killed him off, and the backlash he received from it was so intense. He had to go back and bring him
Yeah.
for a continuation, and he had to
Yeah.
explain, okay, this is how he survives,
Yeah.
and yes, you have to keep the story going. Stories
Mhm.
will live far beyond us, so
Mhm.
Yes.
you have to have Indiana Jones continue to be this adventurer. You have to have Sherlock Holmes
Right into
continue
his
to be this.
90s.
There you exactly. It's like, okay, every story that you tell is just this little snippet of time.
Mhm.
Even if you have him to old age, he can be looking back on an entire lifetime, and you can actually depict him in younger years and continually tell these stories. So it's always there. It's always available. You just have to, be willing to follow him there.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to kill this favorite character, it's like, okay, you're killing the golden goose here. You don't kill this great character everybody loves.
Well, and I
Captain
think,
Kirk
yeah,
is not
people
going to
like to
die.
imagine, they like to imagine these characters outside of the
Yes.
constraints of the single book or whatever. And so, yeah, leaving people with the ability to imagine a future for the characters, I think, is just more, it's just more fun. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
killing's kind of a downer too. I say this, one of my answers to this question is often, like they ask, "Have you ever killed a character?" And I was like, "Well, some of my characters are dead because I have ghosts who
Nice.
are characters. So yes, I guess I killed them, but but they're still around.
Well
So there's
played.
that.
Yeah, I have the same with my urban fantasy series I started off with. The character can see thoughts, and he can actually see memories that are out there. So someone that a close friend who passed away, he actually holds some of the objects that she held, and he actually sees her. So he has these conversations with her. She's not there, but he actually has her living the life in the moment that took place. So it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, even these characters that are gone, you can continue to
Don't have
bring
to
them back in some way.
Cool.
All right, so I have one more process question before we wrap up our live stream. So writing can be a very solitary process, but I find that usually writers have at least one person that they can go to bounce off ideas, especially when it comes to world building. So who is that person for you?
So I have a beta reader critique partner that I've known for quite a long time now. We started off workshopping together, so that got us to know each other. And I send her everything, she sends me everything. It's wonderful to get that extra set of eyes just from
Mhm.
that initial point of view. Tell me what doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I have a couple of beta readers that I started off with. I do use my editor as well, and
Mhm.
my significant other, my gal, she is not a reader, but she will question a lot of
Oh,
things that are in there, which is
it's
terrific because,
useful. That's great.
oh yeah, she will actually question things because as someone who does not read all these big stories and follows them, she can ask questions that I don't even
Mhm.
realize
Yeah.
have to be
Yeah.
answered. For every
Mhm.
new reader that comes along, that's the perspective you want. You want someone who
Yes.
wants to see the new, what are you not familiar with?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's a great perspective that I get from her.
Wonderful.
Yeah, my husband and I will read to each other because in Germany the kitchens are this big. And so we can't both be in there cooking at the same time. So like he'll sit on the floor outside the kitchen and with the dog on his lap and read to me.
Oh, that's
And so when I'm
wonderful.
in the middle, when I'm in the middle of writing something, that's sometimes what we'll do is we'll read whatever it is I'm writing out loud.
Nice.
Whoever's cooking will do the listening. And yeah, it's a really nice way to experience it, not just through my eyes, but to like hear how it
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
and um
I'll
yeah,
do
it's
that with problem scenes with my partner because he's not a
mm,
reader and he really doesn't have much of an interest in knowing what I'm doing. But
mm,
I will take him on a walk and just say, look, I'm just going to vent because I've got a problem and I will come up with a solution, but I just need to say it out loud to someone.
mhm,
So that's really useful too.
absolutely,
Yeah.
Mhm.
absolutely. All right, well, fabulous. So our hour is up. Thank you so much for coming out to LitCon and joining me for the world building panel. So if you guys want to go ahead, remind people your name, the name of your book series, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, so Laurie Bell, I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer. My books that I'm talking about today are Whitefire and The Good, the Bad, and the Undecided. They're available on most online retail stores and you can get them in print as well. And if you want to read any more about me or my books, you can go to my blog, which is solo the first, all one word, .wordpress.com.
All right, fabulous.
I'm Alex G Zarate, an author, artist, and photographer. You can find my work at alexgzarate.com and every social media out there. Look for Alex G Zarate. I have a 5-book urban fantasy series that's going. Every book is a standalone, but they're all continuous. My sci-fi book will be out later this year. It's Drake's Orb.
All right, and I was your
Fantastic.
hostess, Phoebe Darqueling. I pen fantasy and science fiction. I also put together anthologies of multi-author short story anthologies. So the latest one is called Fairy Tales Punked. It's a reimagining of myths and fairy tales using the punk subgenres. And so all of my books that I've edited and written, you can find at bit.ly/PhoebeD, and that'll take you to my Amazon page.